The service that handles these things called at 6:42 a.m. when the motion alert pinged my phone. From the small guest bedroom I'd occupied for the better part of a year, I could see the live feed from the camera I'd mounted inside my father's front window. The image was crisp, a benefit of the fiber optic cable I had installed 2 months prior. On the screen, a woman I knew all too well stood on my father's lawn, arms crossed, pointing. A man in a fluorescent yellow vest held a long, sharpened wooden stake, hesitating. She pointed more forcefully, her mouth forming shapes. I didn't need to hear. To understand, he was a landscaper, or a surveyor's assistant, I presumed. And she was Brenda Davies, president of the Northwood Trace Homeowners Association. And she was standing on property that did not belong to her, directing a stranger to drive a stake into my father's zoysia grass, a lawn he had babied for 40 years. I didn't move immediately. I took a sip of the coffee I brewed in the pre-dawn quiet. It was a dark roast, bitter, the way I'd come to like it. My father was sleeping, or as close to sleep as the morphine drip would allow, in the master bedroom down the hall. The hospice nurse, a kind woman named Maria, wouldn't arrive for another hour. The house was still, save for the low hum of the oxygen concentrator and the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer, a sound so constant I only noticed it when it stopped. On my phone screen, Brenda took a step closer to the man, her body language a symphony of impatience and command. The man looked uncomfortable. He glanced toward the house, perhaps wondering if anyone was home. He had no idea. I put my mug down, slipped on a pair of loafers, and walked to the front door. I didn't rush. The camera was recording. Every word, every gesture was being saved to a secure cloud server, time-stamped and catalogued. I had learned the value of a dispassionate electronic witness. I opened the door, not with a burst of anger, but with a quiet click of the deadbolt. The morning air was cool. Brenda and the man who was now holding the stake like a nervous javelin turned to look at me. Can I help you?" I asked. My voice was level, not friendly, not hostile. It was the voice I used to use in depositions. Brenda's face, which had been a mask of focused authority, curdled into a new expression. Performative exasperation. "Oh, finally. I've been trying to get a response for weeks. Your father has ignored every notice." My father is in hospice care," I said. The words were stones in my mouth. "I has not ignoring anyone." Well, that is unfortunate," she said, and the truly chilling part was that she seemed to mean it, but only in the way one finds a traffic jam unfortunate. It was an obstacle to her objective. But the fact remains, this property is in violation. The Community Covenants, Section 9, Paragraph 3. All properties must maintain a clear and unobstructed view from the street to the front facade. This monstrosity, she said, waving a hand at the row of 8-foot ficus trees that lined the edge of the property. To go. The ficus trees had been planted by my mother 30 years ago. They formed a dense, living wall, affording the front porch a measure of privacy my parents had cherished. They were also, as I knew with absolute certainty, entirely compliant. Those trees predate the formation of the HOA, I stated. It was a fact, not an argument. She laughed, a short, sharp bark of a sound. That is what everyone says. It doesn't matter. We had a vote. The rule was amended. You were notified. She turned to the man with the stake. Mark the line. Right here, she commanded, pointing to a spot 3 feet inside the ficus hedge. The removal crew will be here at 9. She turned back to me, her eyes narrowed. And I suggest you don't interfere. The fines for obstructing official HOA business are substantial. We will put a lien on this house, so fast your head will spin." I looked at the man. He was young, probably a college kid on a summer job. He looked at me, then at Brenda, then at the stake in his hand. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of my head. Just a tremor. He didn't move. Brenda noticed. "Did you hear me?" she snapped at him. "A mark. The. Cray. Line ah." I held up my phone, the screen still showing the live feed. The red dot indicating it was recording was clearly visible. "Brenda," I said, using her first name for the first time. "You are trespassing. You are directing this man to commit an act of vandalism on private property. Every word you are saying is being recorded. Please state your full name and your official capacity for the record." Her confidence wavered for just a fraction of a second. A flicker of uncertainty in her eyes before the arrogance flooded back in. "Am Brenda Davies, president of the Northwood Trace Homeowners Association," she declared, puffing out her chest as if she were announcing herself at a royal court. "And I am enforcing the rules that you people seem to think don't all apply to you. This is my duty, I didn't say another word. I just stood there holding the phone, my expression unchanged. The man with the stake slowly backed away, lowering it to his side. He muttered something about needing to check with his boss and began walking back toward his truck, parked down the street. Brenda watched him go, her mouth agape. She shot me a look of pure venom. This is not over, she hissed. You have no idea who you are dealing with." She turned and marched off. Her furious footsteps, silent on the soft grass. I stood there for a long moment watching her go. And I thought, with a clarity that was as cold and hard as a diamond, "No, you have it backward. You have no idea." She had just handed me the final, perfect, unimpeachable exhibit for a case she didn't even know was being built against her. She had no idea. She had just declared war on a man who had spent 30 years of his life dismantling people exactly like her, one document at a time. But before I tell you what I did next, before I explain the certified letters and the quiet title action, and the day I finally stood up in the clubhouse, you need to understand the foundation of it all. You need to understand the file. It began as a simple manila folder, the kind you buy in a pack of 10 at any office supply store. Now it was a 4-drawer filing cabinet in my Federa study, each folder tabbed, each document housed in a protective plastic sleeve. My name is Arthur Pendleton. For 35 years, I was a forensic accountant. It is a term that people often misunderstand. They imagine me kicking down doors with a calculator, but my work was quieter. I was a bloodhound who tracked cents through paper trails. When a multinational corporation suspected a senior vice president of embezzling funds, they didn't call the police, they called me. My job was to go into a company, sometimes for months, and live within their records. I would read everything: emails, expense reports, invoices, vendor contracts, interoffice memos. I learned to see the narrative hidden in the numbers, to find the one dissonant note in a symphony of data. I didn't look for villains. I looked for anomalies. The villainy always followed. I was good at it, very good. I built a career, a reputation, and a comfortable life on the simple premise that people lie. But documents, when properly assembled, do not. I had retired 2 years ago. My wife Eleanor had passed away the year before that, a sudden and brutal fight with cancer that left me feeling like a house with its foundations scoured out. We had no children. My work had been my life, and with her gone, the work felt hollow. So I retired. I sold our large house in the city and bought a small, quiet condo, intending to spend my days reading history and listening to classical music. Then, A year ago, my father a doctor called. It was his heart. There was nothing more they could do. They gave him 6 months. I packed 2 suitcases and drove the 3 hours back to Northwood Trace, the subdivision where I grew up. My father, George Pendleton, was an engineer, a man of blueprints and principles. He'd designed bridges. He believed in stress tolerances and load-bearing walls, in rules that were based on physics, not whims. He built this house himself, with my grandfather, in 1978. It was one of the first 5 homes in what was then just a tract of undeveloped land. He'd cleared the trees, poured the foundation, and with my mother, planted that ficus hedge. He was a quiet, decent man, who paid his bills on time and never asked for a thing. And now, he was confined to a hospital bed in his own living room, a stranger in the house he had built with his own hands. The HOA came later, in the mid-80s, as the development filled out. My father had always considered it a mild nuisance, a committee of busybodies who argued over the color of mailboxes. He paid his dues and mostly ignored them. For decades it worked. The presidents were reasonable people, retirees with time on their hands, who mostly focused on planning the annual block party. Then came Brenda Davies. She was elected 3 years ago on a populist wave of outrage. A renter had let his lawn go brown. A teenager had thrown a loud party. Brenda, who had moved into the neighborhood only a year prior, saw a power vacuum. She campaigned with the ferocity of a seasoned politician, knocking on doors, organizing coffee klatches, promising to restore property values and enforce the rules. She won in a landslide, and she ruled with an iron fist. My first inkling of her reign came from small talk with old neighbors. Mr. Tar Henderson, who lived across the street, was fined $200 because his new mailbox, a perfectly lovely cedar box, was not on the pre-approved list of 3 generic plastic models. He was given 30 days to replace it. Mrs. Massaday Gable, 2 doors down, was ordered to remove the small stone gnomes that had decorated her flower bed for 20 years. They were, according to the notice, on unapproved lawn statuary. Brenda's method was brutally effective. She found a minor, ambiguous clause in the covenants, interpreted it in the most draconian way possible, and enforced it with righteous zeal. She understood that the cost of fighting a $25 fine for leaving your garbage can out too long was far greater than the fine itself. It was easier to just pay. To comply, she was weaponizing convenience and apathy. People grumbled, but they fell in line. She had created a kingdom of petty tyranny, and she was its undisputed queen. The first notice for my father arrived about 4 months after I moved in. It was a crisp, professionally printed letter. A $25 fine. The violation, a properly stored recreational vehicle. The vehicle in question was my father's old aluminum fishing boat, which had been sitting on a concrete pad behind his garage for 15 years. A pad, I might add, that my father had poured specifically for the boat, and which was completely invisible from the street. My father was already in his decline. He was lucid only in brief, flickering moments. I was handling all his affairs. My first instinct was to write a furious letter, to point out the absurdity, to argue. But then, the old habits kicked in. The forensic accountant in me looked at the notice not as an insult, but as a piece of data. An opening entry in a ledger. What would happen if I didn't argue? What would happen if I simply paid it? So I wrote a check from my father's account for $25. I made a photocopy of the check. I made a photocopy of the notice. I slipped them both into a plastic sleeve and placed them in a new manila folder. Sam. On the tab, I wrote A, Brenda. 2 weeks later, another notice arrived, $50. The violation. A visible exterior mildew on a non-street-facing facade. I went outside. on the back wall of the house, behind the dense azalea bushes. If you contorted your body and held a flashlight at just the right angle, you could see a faint greenish tinge on a few of the bricks near the gutter. It was an area of the house no human had likely seen in a decade. Again, the rage flickered. Again, the professional smothered it. I took a high-resolution photograph of the mildew. I took a photograph of the dense bushes obscuring it. I took a wide-angle shot showing its location on the back of the house. Then I wrote another check. I photocopied everything. I put it all in the folder. This became the rhythm of our lives. Every few weeks, a new notice. $100 for a hairline crack in the driveway. $75 for a satellite dish that had been there since 2005, but was now deemed aesthetically dissonant. $200 for failure to maintain landscape uniformity, because one of the rose bushes my mother planted had died. Each notice was more absurd than the last. And each time I documented. I photographed. I paid. I filed. I kept the receipts. I was not building a defense. I was building a case. I was giving her all the rope she could possibly want, knowing that the laws of physics, like the laws of jurisprudence, would eventually take over. By the time she stood on my father-in-law's lawn that cool morning, threatening to tear down my mother-in-law's trees, the single manila folder had become 4 deep drawers, a meticulous, cross-referenced archive of her reign of terror. She thought she was finding a sick old man. She had no idea she was providing sworn testimony against herself. After Brenda's retreat from my father's lawn, I did not call a lawyer. I didn't post an angry rant on the neighborhood Facebook group. I went back to my father's study, sat down at his old mahogany desk, and got to work. The first order of business was to formalize the warning. A phone call is transient. An argument on a lawn is theater. A certified letter is a legal instrument. I drafted a 2-page letter. My tone was not angry or accusatory, it was clinical. The first section was titled, "A Notice of Trespass." It detailed the events of that morning, with precise times drawn from the video footage. It stated that Brenda Davies, and any contractor acting under her direction, were henceforth forbidden from setting foot on the property located at 124 Northwood Trace. It cited the relevant state statutes for criminal trespass. The second section was a refutation of alleged violations. I went through her claims one by one. Regarding the ficus hedge, I attached a copy of the original 1978 property plat, which clearly showed the house and property lines. I then attached a copy of the 1985 HOA incorporation documents. I highlighted the grandfather clause, Section 12, Paragraph 4, which stated that any structures or landscaping existing prior to the date of incorporation were exempt from aesthetic covenants. My mother's trees were safe on paper. Crasha. I addressed the other fines as well, the mildew, the boat, the crack in the driveway. For each, I included my high-resolution photographs, the copies of the canceled checks proving payment under duress, and a reference to the specific absurdity of the claim. I didn't ask for the money back. Not yet. I simply stated for the record that these fines were baseless, and their payment was not an admission of guilt, but a temporary measure, to avoid conflict while caring for a terminally ill family member. I printed 3 copies. One for my files, one for Brenda, and one for the HOA's registered agent, a law firm downtown. I sent them via certified mail, with return receipt requested. The little green card you get back in the mail with a signature on it is a beautiful thing. It has a piece of paper that says, "You can no longer claim you did not know." Brenda's response was predictable. 2 days after the green card from her signature came back, a post appeared in the private HOA Facebook group. It was a picture of my letter, crumpled into a ball. The caption read, "Some people think they are above the rules. Look what I think of the threatening letter from the lawyer wannabe at the old Pendleton house. We will not be bullied." There were dozens of comments. A "you go girl," a "show him who's boss Brenda," a "thank you for protecting our neighborhood." Someone, a neighbor I didn't know, had taken a screenshot and emailed it to me anonymously with the message, "A good luck. Wall, need it." I saved the screenshot as a PDF, printed it, and filed it. Exhibit 247. Now, the real work began. The fines and the hedge were the presenting symptoms, but I knew the disease ran deeper. An organization this dysfunctional, led by a personality this malignant, had to have other pathologies. It was time to audit the entire Northwood Trace Homeowners Association. I retreated to the study. It became my command center. I had my father's old computer, but I brought in my own rig from storage. A high-powered workstation with 3 monitors. I set up a secure VPN and began to dig. Public records are a treasure trove for those who know where to look. I pulled the HOA tax filings for the last 10 years. I pulled their corporate filings from the Secretary of State. I cross-referenced the names of the board members with other public databases. Then I called Sarah. Sarah had been my paralegal for 15 years. She was younger than me, sharper, and knew her way around online document retrieval systems in a way that was frankly terrifying. I'd retired, but I still had her on a small retainer for personal projects. "Arthur," she said, her voice full of genuine warmth, "I was wondering when you would get bored of reading history books. What is the project? A hostile takeover? A corporate bankruptcy?" Something smaller but no less contentious," I said. There was a pause on the line. "Oh, Arthur. No. You know the first rule of litigation. Never get involved in a land war in Asia, and never sue an HOA. They run on spite, not suing them," I said, "not yet. I'm just conducting a little due diligence. I need everything you can find on the Northwood Trace HOA. Meeting minutes, budgets, vendor contracts, bank statements, if you can get them. Focus on the last 3 years. Since the current president took over, I consider it done," she said. "I'll bill you at the old frenzy rate, which is still exorbitant." The documents started flowing, and the next day, a digital deluge. Sarah was a magician. She had sources. She found the publicly posted meeting minutes, which were vague and useless. But she also found a draft version of those minutes, accidentally uploaded to a public server by the HOA's volunteer secretary. The drafts were a revelation. They contained details that were scrubbed from the final version, heated arguments, motions that were ignored by Brenda, and most interestingly, repeated questions from one board member, a man named David Chen, about the budget for the clubhouse renovation. The clubhouse. It was the jewel of the community. Brenda's signature achievement. Renovated 2 years ago, it had a new pool, a small gym, and a party room. The project had gone over budget, but Brenda had framed it as a necessary investment in their shared future. Following the trail of David Chen's questions, I focused on the renovation. The HOA had taken out a loan from a local bank for the primary work. It was a standard commercial loan, with clear terms. But the numbers did not quite add up. The total cost Brenda had reported to the homeowners was 20% higher than the amount of the loan. Where did that extra money come from? And where did it go? Sarah found the answer 3 days later. She called me at 10 p.m. "Arthur, you're not going to believe this. I had to pull UCC filings. It was a niche search. UCC, or Uniform Commercial Code. Filing is a notice that a lender files to stake a claim on a piece of collateral. Your HOA has a second loan. A mezzanine loan from a company I've never heard of. Apex Capital Ventures, SAA. I typed the name into my search engine. The company had a bare-bones website, A single page with a logo and a post office box in another state. It screamed a predatory lender. "Tell me about the loan," I said, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "Ita's bad, Arthur," Sarah said. "Ita's for $200,000. The interest rate is 18%, and Ita's variable. The collateral, well, Ita's complicated. Ita's not a direct lien on the property, but a lien on the ownership entity of the property. It is a backdoor way of securing the clubhouse itself. And here is the kicker. The loan document was signed by one person as guarantor, Brenda Davies, acting as president. My mind raced through the implications. She had encumbered the OC's single biggest asset without a proper vote. The HOA's own bylaws, which I now knew by heart, required a 2/3 vote of the entire membership for any debt over $50,000. She had bypassed the members, bypassed the board, and signed it herself. But why? I asked, thinking aloud. Why the second loan? Why the secrecy? I think I know, Sarah said, her voice grim. I pulled the vendor payments for the renovation. The main contractor was paid from the bank loan. But there are a series of other payments from the US operating account, classified as a design consultation and a project management visa. They total $187,000. And they were all paid to a single company. She paused for dramatic effect. An interior design firm called the Elegant Spaces by Brenda. I felt a cold stillness spread through me. It was the moment in every investigation I lived for. The moment the tangled web of lies resolves into a single, simple, ugly picture. She had not just been a tyrant. She'd been a thief. She'd invented a budget overrun, secretly taken out a predatory loan to cover it, and then paid herself nearly $200,000 from the proceeds, under the guise of a consulting visa. Sarah, I said, my voice quiet. I need you to find the owner of Apex Capital Ventures, LLC, already on it. She replied. But it is a shell company within a shell company. It'll take a few days to unravel. Take the time you need, I said. I leaned back in my father-in-law's old leather chair. The room was dark, save for the glow of the monitors. The air smelled of old paper and lemon polish. I had found the anomaly. I had found the dissonant note. This was no longer about a ficus hedge. This was about a fundamental breach, a betrayal so profound that the community itself was the victim. Brenda thought she was playing checkers, fining me for lawn maintenance. She had no idea I had just found the evidence to prove grand larceny. Brenda, likely emboldened by the support on her Facebook page and infuriated by my silent refusal to engage, decided to escalate. She did exactly what I had hoped she would. Convinced of her own righteousness and the unimpeachable authority of her office, she called the police. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was in the kitchen puring some soup for my father's dinner, when I saw the flashing blue and red lights sweep across the walls. I looked out the window. A county sheriff's patrol car was parked at the curb. 2 deputies were getting out. Brenda was already on the sidewalk, waiting for them. Her posture was a masterclass in calculated victimhood. One hand was pressed to her chest, her shoulders were slumped, and she had a look of frightened concern on her face. The performance had begun. I turned off the stove, went to the study, and retrieved a thin folder from the top drawer of the filing cabinet. It contained 3 documents: a copy of my driver's license showing this as my legal address, a copy of the durable power of attorney that gave me legal authority over my father's affairs, and a copy of the property deed. I walked to the front door and waited. I could hear Brenda's voice through the door, high-pitched and trembling. "So Afridia, he's been threatening me, lurking in the windows. His poor father, I think he's taking advantage of one of the deputies." A man with a graying mustache and weary eyes knocked on the door. I opened it. Sir, are you Arthur Pendleton?" he asked. "I am," I said calmly. "We received a call from this lady," he said, gesturing with his thumb toward Brenda, who was now dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. "She's made some serious allegations. Says you've been threatening her, that you were not supposed to be here." "I see," I said. I looked past him at Brenda, who met my gaze with a look of triumphant pity. The second deputy, younger, more alert, spoke up. Sir, can we see some identification?" "Of course," I said. I handed the folder to the older deputy. He opened it and looked at the documents one by one. The power of attorney. The deed. His weary expression didn't change, but I saw a subtle tightening at the corner of his mouth. He was a professional. He was reading the facts. "This all seems to be in order," he said, handing the folder back. He then turned his full attention to Brenda. His tone was different now. The solicitous concern was gone, replaced by a flat procedural neutrality. Mom, you said he was threatening you?" Yes," she said, her voice cracking. He sent me a horrible letter. My life is in danger." Did the letter contain a specific threat of physical violence?" the deputy asked. Well, no, not in those words, but the tone. It was very aggressive. Hayes trying to intimidate me out of doing my job. I spoke for the first time. "Deputies," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "I would like to state for the record that this woman, Brenda Davies, came onto this property uninvited last Tuesday morning. This interaction is on video. I sent her a formal notice of trespass via certified mail, a copy of which is in my files. She is the one who is harassing me, and my terminally ill father. I have not threatened her. I have not interacted with her since I mailed that letter. Her presence here today, and this fabricated call to you, is a continuation of her campaign of harassment. I would like to file a formal complaint against her. I will need both of your names and badge numbers for my report." The younger deputy's eyes widened slightly. The older one just sighed. A long, slow exhalation of a man who had seen this small-town drama play out 1,000 times. He looked at Brenda. Her face had gone from triumphant to confused to panicked in the space of 30 seconds. The script had been flipped. She was no longer the victim reporting a crime. She was the subject of a complaint. "Mama," the older deputy said, his voice now tinged with annoyance. This is a civil matter. It is about your homeowners association rules. That's not a law enforcement issue. You cannot use us to settle your neighborhood disputes, and filing a false report is a misdemeanor." But hey," she stammered, pointing at me. The performance had failed. The audience had not bought it. You need to go home." "Maham," the deputy said, his voice leaving no room for argument. And I suggest you and Mr. Pendleton here communicate through your lawyers from now on. Do not call 911 unless there is a real emergency." Brenda stood there speechless. Her face was a mask of disbelief. She had summoned the armed power of the state to smite her enemy, and they had just told her to go to her room. She gave me one last look, a toxic cocktail of hatred and humiliation, and then she turned and stalked away. The older deputy turned back to me. He handed me a small card with a case number written on it. "For your report, sir," he said. His eyes met mine, and for a second I saw a flicker of something sympathy. Maybe, or just professional. Respect for a well-prepared man. The body cameras have been recording this entire interaction. You can request a copy from the county clerk's office. It usually takes a few weeks. Thank you, deputy," I said. I appreciate your professionalism." He just nodded and walked back to his car. I closed the door, the quiet click of the lock echoing in the hallway. I went to the filing cabinet and started a new folder. A police report, a harassment by B. Davies. I placed the card with the case number inside. Another piece of the mosaic, another brick in the wall of evidence I was building around her. She thought she was calling in the cavalry. She had no idea she had just commissioned a neutral third-party documentary about her own unraveling. The police incident was a turning point, not for me, but for the neighborhood. Power like Brenda's thrives in the shadows of private disputes and whispered complaints. The sight of two sheriff's deputies, publicly siding with me and dismissing her, was a crack in the dam. The water of dissent began to trickle through. A few days later, I was outside trimming the rose bushes, ones that had earned my father a $75 fine, when a shadow fell over me. It was Mr. Henderson from across the street. He was a retired postal worker, a man who had spent his life walking a route and keeping to himself. I'd seen him get bullied by Brenda over his mailbox. He was holding a small brown paper bag. "A Mr. Pendleton," he said, his voice low. He kept glancing over his shoulder toward Brenda's house down the street. "I saw what happened the other day with the Sheriff Arthur, please," I said, extending a hand. "And you're Mr. Rake?" "Henderson Dorge," he said, shaking my hand. His grip was firm. Listen, I can't stand what Shay's doing. To you, to your father, to all of us." He pushed the paper bag toward me. "I don't know if this is anything, but I thought you should have it." I opened the bag. Inside was a small, inexpensive digital voice recorder and a USB stick. AI started going to the board meetings when she took over. George explained, his voice barely a whisper. She has a habit of editing the minutes, saying a motion failed when it passed, or that no one objected when half the room was yelling. So I started recording them. For my own records. You understand. A cold thrill went down my spine. George, I said, looking him in the eye. This is more than anything. This is truth. There are 2 years of meetings on that stick," he said. "The audio is not great. I just left it in my shirt pocket. But all there." He pointed to a specific file name, Haid written on the bag. A1. That 1A. That's the meeting. Where she told us all that the bylaws were just suggestions. Her exact words were, "I don't care what the book says. I am the president, and the buck stops with me." She said it like she was proud of it. I could have kissed him. An HOA president, openly stating her disregard for the governing documents, was the kind of gift a litigator dreams of. It eviscerated any defense that she was acting in good faith. "Thank you, George," I said, my voice thick with genuine gratitude. "You are a good man." He just nodded, a weight seeming to lift from his stooped shoulders. As he walked away, I felt a shift. I was no longer a lone actor. I was becoming the focal point for a silent, fearful majority. George was the fearful ally, the first to step out of the shadows. The second was David Chen, the disillusioned insider. He emailed me the next day from a private anonymous account. The subject line was a clubhouse renovation. The email was brief. AI was on the board. I tried to stop her. She overruled me. I have the original contractor bids and her designer invoices. They don't match. Meet me at the coffee shop downtown at 8 a.m. tomorrow. I'll be reading a copy of a Moby Dick. I was there at 7:45. David was a quiet man, an IT manager at a local company. He was terrified but resolute. He laid out the whole story. He had been on the finance committee. He'd seen Brenda's invoices for elegant spaces by Brenda. He'd questioned them in a board meeting, and she had publicly berated him, accusing him of not being a team player. She'd removed him from the committee the next day. Haid kept copies of everything. He slid a thick envelope across the table. She created a fake budget crisis, David said, stirring his coffee with a frantic energy. The main renovation was on track. Saber. But she kept adding things, upgraded fixtures, premium materials the contractor billed her design company for directly. Then her company would bill the HOA with a huge markup. And to cover the shortfall, she took out that other loan. I told her it was illegal. She told me it was a creative financier with George's audio recordings and David's documents. My case went from a personal dispute to a class action level indictment of the entire HOA leadership. I had her on violating the covenants. I had her on harassment. I had her on filing a false police report. And now, I had her on what looked like felony embezzlement. Brenda, however, was not one to retreat. Cornered animals are the most dangerous. Feeling her local power base eroding, she decided to go for the nuclear option. She called an emergency special meeting of the Homeowners Association. The purpose, stated in a stark, threatening email sent to all residents, was twofold. First, to vote on a special assessment and lien of $30,000 against the property at 124 Northwood Trace for cumulative, uncorrected covenant violations and for legal fees incurred by the association in enforcing compliance. Second, to vote on authorizing the board to pursue all legal means, up to and including foreclosure. To resolve this matter, the email arrived in my inbox at 9:14 p.m. On a Tuesday night, I was sitting by my father's bedside. His breathing was shallow. Maria, the nurse, was adjusting his pillows. I read the email on my phone. $30,000. Foreclosure. It was a declaration of total war. It was breathtaking in its audacity, its overreach, its sheer illegality. A special assessment of that magnitude required a full vote of the membership with 30 days of notice, not an emergency meeting called with 48 hours of notice. I looked at my father. He was so frail, a pale ghost, under the thin blankets. This house was his legacy. It was everything he had worked for, and this woman, this petty tyrant, was trying to steal it from him on his deathbed. The rage I had so carefully suppressed for months finally broke through. It was not a hot, blinding rage, but a cold, crystalline one. It was the quiet, focused fury of a man who had just been handed the final missing piece of his argument. This notice was not a threat. It was a confession. It was a document that proved, beyond any doubt, her malicious intent. She had finally overplayed her hand so spectacularly, so publicly, that she had made my job easy. I stood up and went to the study. I opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, the one labeled APAGATAAPEX. Inside was a single thin folder. It contained the corporate ownership documents for Apex Capital Ventures, LLC, the company that held the predatory loan on the Clubhouse. It had taken Sarah and a private investigator 2 weeks to untangle the web of shell companies, but they had done it, and at the bottom of the pile, listed as the sole owner and beneficiary, was a name I recognized, Brenda Davies. She hadn't just paid herself with the loan, she was the lender. She had made the HOA borrow money from herself at an exorbitant rate and was now paying herself back with the residenza dues. And as I looked at the notice for the $30,000 fine on my screen, I realized her plan. She was going to use my father's money to make the next payment on the loan she owed to herself. It was a perfect, closed loop of fraud. I picked up the phone and made one last call. It wasn't to a lawyer. It was to a broker who specialized in distressed debt. I told him I wanted to buy a specific $200,000 note, and I was willing to pay a premium. 2. Have buy. The meeting was in 2 days. I had just enough time. The HOA meeting was held in the Clubhouse, the very monument to Brenda's corruption. The air in the room was thick with a strange mixture of tension and suburban politeness. It was packed. Every seat was taken, and people were standing along the walls. Brenda's supporters, a clutch of about a dozen residents who benefited from her selective enforcement, sat in the front rows, their faces set with grim determination. They were the Praetorian Guard. In the back, scattered throughout the room, were the others: George Henderson, David Chen, Mrs. Gable of the Garden Gnomes, and dozens of other homeowners who had been cowed into silence for years. They looked nervous, but they were there. That was a victory in itself. I walked in and took a seat in the back row. Next to George, I carried a single, old-fashioned leather briefcase. It felt heavy, freighted with the weight of months of meticulous preparation. Brenda was at the podium, flanked by two Loyalist board members. She was wearing a crisp white blazer, an outfit chosen to project an image of clean, unimpeachable authority. She surveyed the room, her gaze lingering on me for a moment, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. She thought this was her victory lap. She called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of a small gavel. She began her performance. Her voice was a carefully modulated instrument, moving from sorrow to resolve. My dear neighbors," she started, "it is with a heavy heart that I have called this emergency meeting. None of us want to be here. We are a community of friends, but we are also a community of laws." She launched into a 15-minute monologue, a masterpiece of spin and victimhood. She spoke of the sacred duty to protect property values. She talked about the tireless, unpaid hours she and the board put in for the good of the neighborhood. She painted a picture of me as a hostile outsider, an aggressive interloper who had come into their peaceful community to sow discord and mock their traditions. She mentioned my dying father, not with compassion, but as a weapon. "It is a tragedy," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she had ready in her hand. "Oh, what is happening at the old Pendleton house. But we cannot let one family's unfortunate situation jeopardize the investment of the other 200 families in this neighborhood." She then laid out the case for the $30,000 fine. She presented it not as a punishment, but as a sad necessity. The only way to recoup the adamajasa my father's non-compliance had caused. She mentioned legal fees, administrative costs, and the vague, unquantifiable damage to the A community aesthetica. It was a brilliant performance. Half the room was nodding along, caught up in the emotion of it all. She had them therefore, she concluded, her voice ringing with phony gravitas. I move that the board approve the special assessment of $30,000 against the property at 124 Northwood Trace, and authorize a lien to be placed immediately. One of her cronies on the board seconded the motion. Looking out at the room before anyone could speak, I stood up. "A point of order, Madam President," I said. My voice was calm and carried easily in the suddenly silent room. Brenda's eyes snapped to me. "You are out of order, Mr. Pendleton. You are not a board member, according to Roberta's Rules of Order, which this association's bylaws explicitly adopt," I said, holding up a small well-worn book, "and according to Section 4, Paragraph 2 of those same bylaws. Any homeowner who is the subject of a motion is entitled to speak before a vote is taken." I had memorized the documents. She had it. A murmur went through the crowd. Sad. David Chen, from his seat on the board, spoke up. "Has right, Brenda, you have to let him speak." Defeated by her own rules, Brenda glared at me. "Fine. You have 2 minutes." I did not go to the podium. I walked to the front of the room and stood on the floor, on the same level as everyone else. I placed my briefcase on a table and opened it, but I did not take anything out yet. "My name is Arthur Pendleton," I began. "My father, George Pendleton, is in a hospice bed 200 yards from where we are sitting. He built his home here 40 years ago. Most of you know him. Most of you know him. Firsty Nad. You know he is a good man. I paused, letting that sink in. For the past 6 months, President Davies has been engaged in a campaign of harassment against my father, levying thousands of dollars in baseless fines against him while he is dying. I have paid every one of them. Jas. I have the receipts. I reached into the briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers, the copies of the notices, and my canceled checks on dropped them on the table. With a heavy thud, she has accused me of being a threat. Yet, when she called the sheriff to my home, it was she who was warned for filing a false report. I have the police report number. I pulled out another document and dropped it on the first pile. She has accused my father of violating covenants that, as the original deeds show, do not even apply to his property. The stack was growing. She has claimed to be acting in the interest of the community and according to the bylaws. But I have here audio recordings of multiple board meetings where she explicitly states her intention to ignore the bylaws and rule by personal decree. I pulled out the USB stick from George Henderson. George sat up a little straighter. The mood in the room had shifted, the nodding had stopped. People were leaning forward, listening. Brenda's face had lost its color. The mask was beginning to crack. And now, I said, my voice dropping lower, she wants you to fine a dying man $30,000. Let us talk about money. Let us talk about this clubhouse. I turned to David Chen. David, as a former member of the Finance Committee, can you confirm that the approved budget for this renovation was $1.1 million, funded by a loan from First National Bank? David, finding his courage, stood up. 1.1 million. And can you confirm that the final cost reported to the homeowners was nearly $1.3 million? Yes, David said, that is also correct. And can you confirm, I continued, my eyes locking on Brenda, that you questioned a series of payments totaling $187,000 made to a vendor called Elegant Spaces by Brenda? A gasp went through the room. People turned to look at Brenda. Her face, which had been pale, was now a dead, waxy white. That's enough, she shrieked, finding her voice. This is slander. You have no proof. Oh, but I do, I said quietly. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the last file. It was the file from the bottom drawer. The one labeled a probe prox. A payback, to cover the budget shortfall that she herself created by paying her own company. President Davies took out a secret predatory loan for $200,000 from a shell corporation called Apex Capital Ventures. She did this without board approval, without membership approval, in clear violation of our bylaws. She used this clubhouse, our clubhouse, as collateral. The room erupted. People were shouting, standing up. Brenda was banging her gavel, but no one was listening. Hey, quiet, I roared, and the sudden volume shocked the room into silence. I'm not finished. I let the silence hang for a moment, then continued in a low, cold voice. The worst part isn't the secret loan. The worst part is who owns the company that holds the loan. I held up the final document, the one showing the ownership of Apex Capital Ventures. As of 3 days ago, the sole proprietor of the company you are all in debt to was Brenda Davies. The collapse was instantaneous and total. It wasn't a slow crumble. It was the demolition of a building. The mask did not just drop, it shattered. The woman who stood at the podium was gone, replaced by a cornered, panicked animal. Her eyes, wide with terror, darted around the room, looking for an ally and finding only a sea of shocked, angry faces. She had no idea She truly had no idea that I could or would dig this deep. She thought the fight was about her power over my father's lawn. She never understood the fight was about the numbers in her ledger. I let the revelation hang in the air, a toxic cloud. As she was going to use the $30,000 from my dying father to make a payment on the loan that she owed to herself. It was the perfect crime. I paused. I said that one word, and it changed everything. As I said, Brenda Davies was the owner of Apex Capital Ventures. However, due to a minor technical issue, specifically a missed payment to one of her contractors, which triggered a default clause she hadn't read carefully, a note was put up for sale on the secondary debt market. I closed the distance to the table and picked up a single crisp, folded document from my now empty briefcase. I unfolded it slowly, and as of 3 p.m. yesterday, my family trust became the new owner of Apex Capital Ventures, and by extension, the sole creditor for the $200,000 loan on this building. I held up the paper. I own the mortgage on your clubhouse. And as of this morning, due to multiple incurable covenant breaches in the loan agreement, your homeowners association is in default. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence so profound it felt like a physical pressure. You could hear Brenda's ragged breathing. In that moment, everyone in the room, especially Brenda, finally understood. I had not just come to defend myself. I had come to take everything. I hadn't just paid her ridiculous fines. I had used that money and a great deal more to buy the gun she had pointed at the community's head. And now I was the one holding it. The chaos that followed was immediate. The meeting didn't just dissolve, it combusted. People were on their feet shouting. Not at me, but at Brenda. Bye. The Praetorian Guard, her front row supporters, were staring at her with looks of betrayal. They had been lied to, used as props in her personal enrichment scheme. Someone started shouting a recall. Recalla, and the chant was picked up around the room. David Chen, with a newfound spine of steel, formally called for a motion of no confidence in the president. It was seconded by a dozen voices at once. Brenda stood frozen for a moment, then she tried to flee. She grabbed her purse and pushed her way through the side of the crowd, but there was nowhere to go. She was surrounded by the faces of her neighbors, no longer fearful, but furious. The sheriff's deputies, whom someone had wisely called as soon as the shouting started, arrived and had to escort a weeping, hysterical Brenda from the building. It was a far cry from the triumphant exit she had envisioned. In the days that followed, the full scope of the fallout became clear. A formal recall vote was held, and Brenda was removed from the board by a margin of 198 to 2. The two dissenting votes were her own and that of her husband. An interim board was appointed, with David Chen as the reluctant president. They immediately hired an independent forensic accountant colleague I recommended to conduct a full audit. The audit confirmed everything I had uncovered and more. Brenda had been using the HOA ATA's debit card for personal expenses for years. Groceries, gas, spa days, all coded as a miscellaneous community supplies. The total embezzlement came to over $300,000, including the fraudulent design fees. The new board, on the advice of their lawyer, turned the entire file over to the district attorney. Brenda was charged with multiple felonies, including grand larceny, fraud, and embezzlement. Faced with the mountain of evidence I had assembled, she pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 3 years in state prison. Her house was sold to cover the restitution she owed to the HOA. The $30,000 fine against my father was, of course, rescinded, but I didn't stop there. I had my lawyer send a letter to the new board. It was not a threat, but a statement of fact. It detailed the harassment, the baseless fines, the emotional distress. It suggested that a lengthy and expensive lawsuit could be avoided if they simply did the right thing. They did. They issued a formal public apology to my father's memory and refunded every single penny I had paid in fines. With interest, the check was for $4,728.14. I endorsed it and donated it to the hospice organization that had cared for my father. As for the clubhouse, I kept my promise. I didn't foreclose. That was never the point. The point was leverage. The point was control. The point was justice. I met with the new board with David and George and a shaken but resolute Mrs. Gable. I showed them the terms of Brenda's predatory loan. Then I tore it up. In its place, I offered them a new loan, directly from my trust. The amount was the same, but the interest rate was 2% afar, below market rate, and the term was 30 years. It was a fair deal, a helping hand, not a punitive one. It was a way to restore order. They accepted. The community started to heal. The oppressive rule of aesthetic tyranny was over. People started planting gardens again. George Henderson painted his mailbox a vibrant, defiant shade of blue. My father passed away peacefully 2 weeks after the meeting. He never knew the details of the battle I had waged in his name. But in a moment of clarity, the day before he died, grabbed my hand and whispered, "A good boy, Arthur. You always finish the job." I stayed in his house for another few months, sorting through a lifetime of memories. I packed up my mother's china and my father's engineering books. The 4-drawer filing cabinet, full of Brenda's downfall, I had professionally shredded. Its purpose was served. The house sold quickly to a young family with 2 small children. On my last day, after the moving trucks were gone, I stood on the front porch, the same spot where I had confronted Brenda what felt like a lifetime ago. The ficus hedge was green and full. The neighborhood was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was not the silence of fear, it was the silence of peace. I thought about the nature of rules. Brenda had seen them as a weapon, a tool to bludgeon people into submission for her own gain. My father had seen them as a blueprint, a way to build things that were strong and true. I had come to see them as a shield, a defense for the quiet and the decent, against the loud and the corrupt. In my hand I held the single key to the front door that I would leave for the new owners. It was a simple object, a piece of metal cut with a precise pattern. It was not a symbol of power or status. It was a tool that, when used correctly, provided security and peace. It was a testament to the idea of rightful ownership, of having a place in the world that was yours, governed by reason and protected by law. I had not set out to be a warrior, but I had been forced to fight. And in the end, by being more meticulous, more patient, and more prepared than my opponent, I had won. Not just for me, but for the entire community. The long, exhausting battle was over. I had restored order. I took a deep breath, a long, slow exhale, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt a sense of peace. The job was finished.